So thank you very much, Jennifer, to be with us, to have this conversation with the fellows. And we have here fellows from many parts of Africa, also from Brazil and Argentina as well. I don't see Lucia here. She's coming, but we have, Lucia is there. Okay, Lucia.
Hi, how are you?
Is there. We have Perihan, we have Francisco, Blessing. Hello, Blessing. Good to see you. Rene and Marina and Nita. And I think we have two more people coming. So I know the theme that we're going to have today is very sophisticated, I can say. But when you talk about sophisticated theme, I know that Jennifer can bring this in a very easy, comprehensive approach. That's why I understand after 30 minutes of the presentation of Jennifer, the topic of the fourth sector will be very much easy for us to understand. And I understand the fourth sector relates the role of the private sector with the development. And I understand this is very important in the moment that we're facing. So Jennifer, without delay, I will pass the floor to you. Please feel free to give us some ideas and some orientations about how this topic is so important for us today.
Thanks so much, Wow. And I am just delighted to be here. And I have looked at your backgrounds and the things that you guys are studying and doing research on, and your different topics and your areas of interest. And I do hope that this resonates. And it's true. Like, I think what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to share my screen in a moment, and I'll try to get through it relatively quickly. It's not necessarily new. I don't think you're going to look at this and go, oh, well, I never heard of that. But what I like about the fourth sector is it's a new way of thinking about how we need to do economic systems differently. And as Joao said, it's about the private sector role, but it's really about the blending of government, business, and NGOs into a new sector that we know, social or sustainable business for benefit enterprise. But thinking about how you make that happen more, right? Because we know what happens. I'm sure you guys know lots of people working for sustainable or social enterprise. I mean, Africa is a hotbed, I think, of social enterprise, and I would like to see a lot more. It's the same in Latin America. So I'm really delighted to talk about this. So let me quickly share my screen. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to, when I do this, you'll just see the slides, I think. I won't be able to see you. But we'll have time to talk at the end, just because I'm trying to make sure that you're able to really see the screen, because there's different bits of information in different parts. So let me go to, okay, I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to go into slideshow. Start from beginning. Okay, so let me know when you guys can see this. Can you see what's on the screen? Okay, now I'm gonna close a little bit the people, the faces, at least for me. I think that it might close it for you guys as well, so that I can really see, and you can all see the different slides. So, I mean, I think just to start again, I already mentioned this is about a blending of the different sectors of the economy that we know. And I think the whole point that I'm really interested in talking about this right now is that we're bouncing back, hopefully, soon from a massive dislocation, a huge crisis. And I see the fourth sector as being a really important way of ensuring that the recovery does benefit all without destroying the planet, hopefully. Just to mention that I'm drawing on work that's been done by the fourth sector group. I sit on their advisory group. I also co-chair their strategy group. And I'll mention Rebecca Greenspan, who's chairwoman of Iberoamerica, and she's also part of the strategy group. So you'll see that there's quite a lot of work already going on in this area. But I want to get the word out. So you might not have heard of this yet, but I hope that this won't be the last time that you hear about it. There's a lot more online. Okay, so to get started, why do we care about the fourth sector? Why did when Joao said to me, you can speak about whatever you want, why did I want to talk to you about this? I think we all know, and this is much of what you guys are working on, that we're facing numerous challenges today. Something that you can call wicked problems, as it shows on the screen. And they're only growing in scope. And we know that it's getting worse and worse. Inequality, poverty, including child poverty, pollution, climate change, you name it, we're seeing growing challenges. And in many places, it's really been exacerbated by COVID-19. So it is a moment of sort of taking stock. So the question is, why is this happening and what can we do about it? Now, we know a lot of good work is going on already by, organizations, individuals, but it could be accelerated. If you have the right sorts of enterprises, and I'll be talking about them, as well as the right sorts of supportive environments so that they can be fostered and thrive. So where are we coming from? If you look at the economic system that we have inherited today, all the systems and organizations that we have were designed when the world was very different. I mean, you kind of go back to the 1700s and Adam Smith writing Wealth of Nations and all through the creation of the first joint stock companies, so on and so forth, even the discussions about communism, socialism, all the way through. They were built at a time when basically, if you look at, again, the time scale, GDP was very low. There wasn't a lot of growth, but there weren't a lot of people and we weren't using a lot of resources yet. So basically the system that was built was very extractive, but it was extractive for growth in a way that didn't, I guess, yet abuse the system so much, or at least wasn't taking such a toll yet. Of course, there was then colonialism and lots of other, bad things that we saw, and so over time, this is something that we sort of turned around and said, this is not great. I mean, look at the challenges that have come with that growth, right? I mean, and with the population growth, whether it's temperature increases, tropical forest loss, carbon dioxide increases. I mean, basically with growth comes all of these challenges. And where is it coming from? Now, if you look at the three sector system that we're very familiar with, it basically has these sectors, right? Business, government, and nonprofits. And in the system, the business is bigger, there's a bigger circle because it has an outsized influence. Why? Because it generates the resources, the revenues that are then used to fuel both the government through taxation or nonprofits, which either they do a pass through from the taxation or, basically there's philanthropy. And so, basically you can keep growing, right, this way, and you can keep sort of giving some of the money that business generates. But if you do that, it's pretty clear that, okay, you'll have growth, that's the green, the solutions, but you'll also have outsized problems that are getting bigger and bigger over time. And so, I think there's really no way for us to just grow our way out of this problem. And so we really need to change something fundamentally. So we need to think outside the box. And as Albert Einstein has said, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. And I think he also said something like, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And so, how do we think about this differently? And let me just try to get rid of, that's why I can't get rid of the screen on top. Anyway, so, the idea is to basically deconstruct the solution, think forward about the kind of world we would like to have, and then work backwards and think, what could we do to make things different? Let's not be constrained by our traditional ways of thinking about things. We're sort of in this box of the three sectors, and, think what could actually work a lot better. So if you think about the world, and the economy, it is made up of individuals. We're all individuals. Each of us are making decisions each day that lead to specific outcomes. And we're all wearing different hats, depending on what time of the day it is. We might be a voter at one point, an investor, a consumer, an employee, a volunteer, a taxpayer. So this is what makes up the economy. Now, of course, there's also organizations. And those organizations both enable and constrain individual behavior. I mean, are you going to be working in a more inclusive, sustainable way or less so? Organizations are basically helping us to make those decisions. And then all of this is basically under the framework of a supportive ecosystem, right? I mean, you need to have all of these things like financial markets at the top. I don't know if you can see it, but it's basically, regulation, education and training, technical assistance, all of these things that allow organizations to thrive. And so, the idea is, given that we are all making multiple decisions every day, how can you align to the extent possible those choices with a more sustainable future? And you need to make it, the whole point is to make it obvious and easier for everyone all the time on things like climate change. So how can we, change the system so that it's more supportive of our development and sustainability goals. And again, thinking back to those individuals, you know, the idea is that you want individuals to basically make it easier for individuals to make better choices in terms of being conscious consumers. You want organizations and businesses to become more sustainable and inclusive in terms of how they behave. And you want that ecosystem so that you basically have the right kinds of, you know, investment, regulation, metrics, and tools. These things are happening in many ways, and we know that there are very powerful, you know, sustainable businesses that are out there, but the world is still headed in the wrong direction. I think like that's very clear right now because everybody's just kind of focused on one part of the solution. And, you know, so how do you basically, you know, get people from looking just at one part of the challenge and provide, you know, a system that is adapted to the needs of a place where there's lots and lots of people, lots of pollution, and lots of challenges that we need to solve. Now, at the same time, the good news is that organizations are already changing. So if you know, sort of all organizations ranging from those that are maximizing financial benefit and those that are maximizing social benefit, of course, you would have for-profit, you know, companies on the left side and nonprofits and government on the right side. And, you know, we're seeing that in many ways, actually, and that's an arrow. I'm not sure if you can see it, but, you know, for-profits are getting closer to nonprofits and governments in many ways. They're becoming more purposeful, right? We see that with corporate social responsibility, focus on ethics, you know, carbon offsets, you know, green business, so on and so forth. So this is one thing that's happening. They're basically borrowing from the experience of nonprofits and government. Now, if you then take all those same organizations and you put them on an axis and you basically plot them based on whether they have earned income, right, or contributed income, right? So earned income is what companies are doing, and contributed is basically through tax grants. I mean, what we saw in terms of the governments, we see that governments are also, you know, learning from and borrowing from the private sector, and they're becoming more accountable. Right? They're becoming more effective. And in some cases, they are even starting to earn, when you really get to the center, their own revenue. And here you're getting closer to social enterprise or sustainable enterprise. So then if you take those two axes again, and you put them, you know, you plot them, you know, as sort of an X and Y axis, and you find again, right, on the upper left-hand corner where you have maximizing financial benefit and earned income, on the upper left-hand side, you have the private sector. On the lower right-hand side, where you have maximizing social benefit and contributed income, you have the social sector, nonprofits, and the public sector. And then, you know, beautifully, because they're both moving, you start seeing the creation of this new sector that is basically between them, right? It's sort of a blend of the others. And that's what we call the fourth sector. And the point of the fourth sector is it basically has a social purpose. It's for benefit, not necessarily for profit, but it earns its own income, right? And this is something that we've been seeing happen. So this is something that's extremely positive. And another positive thing is that there is a fourth sector ecosystem, emerging. So you're seeing that, you know, there are new sorts of corporate models that governments are recognizing, you know, whether it's social purpose corporation, for benefit corporation, so on and so forth. Financial markets are starting to sort of organize themselves to lend to these sorts of hybrids, right? This is a hybrid type of organization. There are even ratings and certifications that are popping up, you know, B Corp, other things that you might have heard about, you know, Dow Jones Sustainability Index, you know, standards that are the counterpart of the ratings and the certification, right? So more and more standards that people know that they have to follow if they want to be this sort of, you know, this sort of enterprise. And yet, I think that the tricky thing is this is happening, but in a very disjointed way, and in a different way in different places, right? So it's where you basically get ourselves organized in a way that ensures that it's easier for people, like you want to create a social or sustainable enterprise, you know exactly how to do it. So in terms of the size and scope, it's hard to quantify the fourth sector because, you know, basically the numbers are captured in the general statistics with the public, social, or private sector in the other three sectors. But there have been estimates made, and in the US, for example, it's estimated that the fourth sector contributes about 5 to 15% of GDP, and 10 to 20% of US jobs. And, so there is, and it's growing, and so it's something that's becoming incredibly important for a number of different sectors. I mean, whether it's providing, sustainable healthcare and inclusive healthcare, sustainable food and agriculture, energy, so on and so forth. Now, as well as that, and that's also good news, is that people like this. People basically want to align their behaviors and their activities, and ideally their job, which is something that takes a lot of time, with the values that they have, and so employees, this all comes from different sort of surveys around the world. Employees, by some estimates, 81% consider corporate social responsibility when deciding when to work. Consumers, increasingly globally, seek out more responsible products when they can. Investments are increasingly moving in the more sustainable and responsible direction. Not 50% yet, but it's getting there. Students who have been surveyed in some places, MBA students, have said they take a 15% pay cut to work for an organization whose values are like their own. Again, I would love to see that being 100%, but it's something. Those are MBA students. So and the job growth is significant. Again, about 2 times, because people see the challenges everywhere, and these are businesses to be created, and so they are being created, but we need to do more to make it easier. Now, just to kind of summarize what I've just said, for benefit enterprises, create quality jobs. Okay, people like these jobs, ideally, better than maybe working in a widget factory. Not that there's anything wrong with working in a widget factory, but maybe it's, sometimes people want to do more than just paying the bills. And it also spurs economic growth while doing many other things, like leveraging market-based approaches, solving many of the societal and environmental problems that you're used to looking instead to government or NGOs to do. Lowering the costs on government, again, don't expect government to do everything, and even generating new resources for nonprofits. Some of these, for benefit businesses are donators. They basically provide philanthropic finance. So, basically, this is such a good thing. We need to basically level the playing field. And just to say, it's good for the other 3 sectors. For the private sector, it's good to have a fourth sector because it's bigger markets. It even gives them new opportunities, new ideas. For the public sector, as I've already mentioned, it's obviously job creation, which is something that government always likes, but also, new revenues and basically unloading on it some of the things that it's supposed to do. And the social sector similarly, and even sometimes, scalable solutions that it's able to scale up afterwards. Now, we all are very familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think, again, not to beat a dead horse, but it's clear to me that these are the sorts of enterprises that really can help if we're serious about, achieving these goals in what are still less than 10 years, or any other goal. We'll come up with a new set of goals afterwards. But, these are the sorts of things that, or these are the sorts of enterprises that they reduce new harms. They're able to eliminate some of the root causes. They come up with new solutions. They collaborate. And so I think, clearly this is something that governments need to harness if they're serious about the SDGs. And, maybe don't take it from me. There are other illustrious thinkers and personalities who have supported the fourth sector. Pope Benedict, former Pope, basically said he hopes that this new form of enterprise will succeed, basically in finding a fiscal and juridical structure in every country, that there is legislation that actually supports it. I mentioned Rebecca Greenspan, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And, basically she and the Ibero-American Summit Group have basically been pushing for this and understanding that in order to basically achieve the SDGs that I just mentioned, we need to be harnessing for benefit models. And finally, Sir Richard Branson, who, famously has been working in this area for a very long time. Now, he basically is saying again, he launched the idea of, he had the B team, a lot of B Corp stuff came out of the work that they were doing. So, we should make it easy to launch and grow for benefit business, and so how do you level that playing field with the right kind of legal environment, financial markets, accounting standards, and all the other things that regular, companies and NGOs can depend on. Now, just the last few slides about, what can actually be done about that. Now, governments, I think, and I'm kind of going to end on policy, because if you think about the discussions that tend to take place about, social enterprise, sustainable enterprise, the focus is always on the companies, right? The focus is on like, more people should do things like that, or maybe existing companies should change. And I am not saying that that's not the case. But if you don't have the right structures in place at the national or local or regional level, then it's very hard for them. The way that Hirad Sabeti talks about this, and he's the CEO of the Fourth Sector Group, is like, if you imagine a highway, for regular companies, right? Or NGOs, like there is a highway for companies. You want to create a company, you know which window to go to, you know what kind of structure to create, you know where you can find accountants, et cetera, et cetera. Same for NGOs. This highway doesn't exist for the fourth sector, when you're in between. So how do you create that highway? So governments are incredibly important in this. And so we very much need legislation, and also just governments to understand this. And basically provide then or at least provide the structures that will provide the financial and capacity support that are needed in order for this to grow. And so, things, I won't go through this whole list, but things like recognizing for benefits as a distinct class of organization. It's not an NGO, right? It's not a company, it's in between. Leveling the playing field, in terms of accountability requirements, taxation. And then frankly, if they're going to get special tax treatment, which they might sometimes, then hold them accountable for their impact with, reporting requirements, and then kind of following up on those. And so these are the sorts of things that I think are very important at the government level. Now, I'm pleased to say that, although this hasn't become like a huge movement, and I'm hoping that it becomes more of one, there are pioneering governments that are exploring this. And they're really trying to put in place what's needed. So for example, the state of California has a comprehensive fourth sector economic development ambition to become, quote, the best place in the world to start and grow a for-benefit company, which is pretty amazing. I mentioned Iberoamerica and Rebecca Greenspan. They basically have come out with a declaration saying, more or less, that they want to harness the fourth sector to advance the SDGs. And that's important because it spans between Europe, the Iberian Peninsula and Latin America. India is starting to take this seriously. They're looking at creating a social stock exchange that would actually provide that support, financial support to the for benefits. Panama's looking at legislation. And in the US, which in many ways can be kind of a leader in some of these innovative developments, 35 states have adopted new corporate forms, which is good, but they're not yet, providing the whole kind of infrastructure and ecosystem that's needed. And finally, and this, I'm speaking to you guys as researchers who are working on things, and just in case any of this is of interest to you, maybe to integrate into some of your work now or maybe in the future, the Fourth Sector Group is working on a policy toolkit. And so, kind of policy blueprints, things like this, instruments that can be rolled out, which can then be adapted to each country's context, or even a region or sub-regional, while kind of ensuring that we keep a global standard and policy coherence, because it's important to make sure, to the extent that we have some learnings that people don't go out and, reinvent the wheel. And everybody should make mistakes because that's how innovation comes, but, try to avoid the ones that are avoidable. And, governments will also need a wide range of support. So whether it's, first just mapping so that they understand like what the fourth sector and its ecosystem is in their country, their region, their city, policy analysis, policy training, and so on and so forth. So really a lot of exciting things that can be done. And I would just leave you with one thought, which I have been thinking about a lot, which is if you look at, how we're trying to rebound from this major crisis, the biggest crisis in generations, and the trillions of dollars that are going into supporting, especially in advanced economies, but not only, economies all around the world. And most of that money, pretty much all that money is going into supporting the old structure, the three sector structure. Companies with the, kind of the extractive perspective and drive. And okay, yes, because jobs are at stake and many other things, but just imagine if just a bit of that effort would be put into putting in place the right structures for a fourth sector. And supporting those companies so that you have that kind of creative destruction that brings about a more sustainable future and a more inclusive future. So I think that's where I will leave it. And I will actually now try to stop the share and come back to you guys. And I hope that that was all relatively clear. But as you see, it's not rocket science, you know, but I mean, at least for me, I remember the first time that Hirad, I was still working at the World Economic Forum at the time, and he came to Geneva and he started talking to me about this. This was like 5 or 6 years ago. And I just felt like for me as a development economist, I was like, wow, there's language. Like that's language for something that I've been thinking about. So anyway, with that, let me pass it over to you, Joao, and to the wonderful fellows to hear if you have any thoughts, suggestions, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Well, I knew it. I knew that your presentation could be something that will impact us. And I know I can see in the top of our fellows' head some smoke, maybe. Their brain, like my brain, are burning, right? Because of the many information that you just gave us. And I understand this is something new, but it's not that new because we are involved in this ecosystem anyway. So I have some questions, but I don't want to use my questions. I want to open the floor for the fellows. I don't see any hands. So
I have my hands up.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Periha, you have your hands up. I'm sorry. Okay, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you very much, Professor, for this invitation for Mr. Blanke. And thank you very much for the presentation. It's very inspiring. It's very alive and it's very new in terms of the way of presenting and everything in the slides. So I love it. And I believe that it would be appreciated if you share with us like a link for the blueprints. I believe they are very interesting, and the presentation also, if you can share, it's very colorful and very attractive to the eye and to the brain. Thank you very much.
That with great pleasure. So I'll make sure I get that to you, and then I'll find out where the latest blueprints are. But I mean, and even if you just go onto the fourth sector group, but we also have some subsidiary or related websites that also have interesting things. Because a lot of, I didn't even talk about in this, but as you guys know, like the Business Roundtable, all these business leaders are coming out and saying how important this stuff is, right? So we're trying to also harness them to get governments to realize that even business thinks this would be good. Anyway.
All right, let me. Okay, Lucia, please go ahead.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. How the fourth sector works? You talk about strategic group, and you mentioned another board. How is working?
So how does the fourth sector group work?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I was like, how does fourth sector work?
But,
yeah. No, I mean, which is okay because I can go over it. But okay, so the fourth sector group, it's a volunteer organization basically that was launched. So here at Sabeti, you can find out about him online, and he's a serial entrepreneur, and he was part of the B team also when it was originally set up, and he became increasingly interested in this, over a very long period of time. So he set it up, and we just all get together. So like, there's people from OECD, from UNDP, from LSE. So a lot of us that come together, and we do it in our free time right now, although there's an organization that works full time on this. So if you're interested in, basically providing some support, for example, because you're interested in this, or you're just interested in talking to people from the organization, which is a bit, I would love it to be even bigger. Then I can definitely put you in touch, or we can have another conversation afterwards. But you know, the way it works is that we basically have regular meetings. We have a communication group that's, you know, looking to push out, you know, say blogs and things like that. We have work going on where we're trying to work with the US government, for example, because they're quite interested in this. So different strains. And then we have a whole other strain of work where we're working with philanthropic organizations that want to use their funding to really be transformative, right? So how do you take that next step to no longer just be kind of, you know, helping people, which is very important, and there will always be that aspect of philanthropy, but how do you move to that next level where you're actually using your finances to really, you know, change things fundamentally, like the way that I was just talking about.
Good. Now we have Rene. You raise your hand, and then after we have a Blessing and Nita. Rene, please.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer, for your presentation. It was really amazing, as said. The first question, I'm Renee from South Africa, and the first question I just was interested in is, what do you think the role of youth is in the fourth sector, particularly youth in Africa and in Brazil? I wanted to say in the global south, but we can narrow it down, you know, for this context, especially young entrepreneurs. And my other question was, just in trying to understand what you said about the fourth sector, does it play like a coordinating role of like some economic externalities that come from the private and public sector? Like what coordinating role does it play? Because it seems like it plays some coordinating role. And my last question is in relation to policy coherence. In South Africa, when I look at the impacts of the COVID-19, especially on SDGs, particularly SDG 3, you can see that there's been a lack of some policy coherence. So in terms of policy coherence, you talked about that the fourth sector, they'll be developing a toolkit, a policy toolkit. How will that policy toolkit help governments know which economic policies to prioritize? Because I think with some frameworks we have, especially the framework for sustainable development, yes, it talks about policy coherence, but it doesn't really help governments know which priorities to prioritize. Okay, thank you. Let me not drag it on. Thanks.
Thanks, Renee. And I think I'll answer your last one first, which is, how do you think about, you know, policy coherence in this? Look, I mean, that's always a challenge for governments. And I think the first step with everything around fourth sector is for the government to first recognize it can't do everything, right? It can't do everything itself, and it needs help, right? And that you have this sort of hotbed of activity going on already, right? I mean, in South Africa, my gosh, so much of this going on. And if they can actually provide the right structure, then and then in terms of policies, it's just let them thrive, right? So when I'm talking about, you know, kind of coherence here, it's about, you know, what kinds of structures they have to be put in place just to make it attractive to create and to grow these sorts of organizations, right? Which will then unload on them, right? Because it's so much more innovative, and they get innovative ideas from these organizations as well. You know, government isn't always the most innovative. I'm not saying it isn't sometimes, but, you know, it's not like the place that you would think of going to. So I think that's the main thing with this. It's like, then they don't have to figure out everything. They still do need to have a sustainability policy and things like that, obviously. And they can get input from these organizations once they fully unleash their potential. You know, so I'd say that's the first one. Secondly, in terms of youth, my gosh. I mean, first of all, if you look at Africa, you know, sub-Saharan Africa, like median age is 19 or whatever, like youth are critical. And it's all, I mean, Latin America is also very young, right? So how do you harness that incredible talent? And I can tell you, I was until recently at the African Development Bank, and what amazed me always was the incredible energy of young people and all these amazing ideas. And I've been saying, you know, that Africa, and I know it's the same in Brazil because I have the same experience, you know, meeting people there. It's like, it's just you've social entrepreneurs everywhere, right? Or potential social entrepreneurs everywhere, because young people see challenges everywhere. And those are businesses waiting to be created, right? Those are goods and services that are not being provided, you know? So I think the youth are critical in this, especially in the regions that you guys come from. And frankly, let's make sure we unleash young people's potential, because you know what the alternative is, right? I mean, we don't need to necessarily talk about that now, but we know what's happening. And especially in West Africa, where I was living, you just go up to the Sahel, it's a bit scary right now. And when young people have no opportunities, that's not great. But when you have so many challenges that need to be solved, and those are businesses that are jobs, then what a beautiful thing to do. So anyway, so that's kind of why I'm so interested in the fourth sector. And then, I mean, they don't play a coordinating role. I think it's always the government that plays the coordinating role, right? But what they have to do is then, because these are businesses, right? I mean, they're enterprises, they're organizations. They have their own raison d'etre, they have their own, what they're doing. But the whole point is that they are trying to solve some of these challenges. They get out of bed every morning thinking, how am I going to solve these challenges? And so the government needs to make that easier for them, right? And so it's not like, it's not a coordination role. The coordination will always be, I think, at the regulation level. But then of course they will work. I mean, they're probably, interested, they want to work, they can work, they understand kind of government, they understand NGOs, they understand business. So they can be hugely important in terms of getting everybody else talking to each other. They can be a translator, I guess. So I hope that answers your questions. Okay.
Good, thanks, Jennifer. Let's go to Blessing now.
Hello, thank you for the wonderful lecture. My question is, you mentioned of complex problems, and then you mentioned of deconstruction. How do we achieve deconstruction or such innovation without destabilizing fragile states? Thank you.
Okay, well, fragile states, I mean, very good question. Thanks, Blessing. How do you think about, I mean, fragile states are states that don't have any of this stuff functioning very well, very often, right? So I don't see this destabilizing, right? All we're saying, I mean, when I say deconstruct, we're deconstructing the problem, right? We're basically saying, let's not think that we're stuck in a box. Let's think outside the box. We have this 3-sector box right now. Let's think outside the box, but that's us sort of intellectually, and then for the government to understand it. But the beautiful thing actually about the fourth sector is you don't have to kill anything. All you do is you create that new highway, right? So that fourth sector companies can thrive. And then over time, ideally, this is the way I look at it, again, as a development economist who cares a lot about sustainability and environmental degradation. And I care a lot about, I mean, the core of everything I do is inclusiveness, is you create them, and over time, hopefully, but it'll be an evolution, they take over most of the activity in an economy, right? When it comes to kind of private sector, but it's just done in a much more inclusive and sustainable way because people would rather work there, right? Because they're solving those problems, because regulation over time will become very expensive for those who are destroying the environment or who are not taking care of communities. So I think, but I think the whole point of why I'm kind of talking to you guys about this, and I care a lot about fourth sector as a concept, is because it can, if governments take this seriously, and all they have to do is create the right structure, name somebody in government who cares about this stuff, talk about it, that they can create a movement towards the kinds of enterprises that we all know would be much better for our collective future. So I think it's not about, it's not like breaking apart. People will still have their jobs, but then the idea is that you kind of create this new thing, and then over time, and hopefully faster if we can make it easier for them. Did that make sense, Blessing? But like I have to say, in some of the fragile states, like, I mean, if you look at, I mean, some of the ones that were near me, whether it's Chad, or others that are kind of they would benefit greatly from this, greatly.
Yeah, I think we could have another conversation about the fragile states and the G7 Plus, which is related with this team, is launching many projects, and I think this is a specific discussion about the fragility. I think it's important, and Jennifer raised a very important point. So let's come to Nita. It's your time, Nita.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Jennifer, for the presentation. You have already answered a part of my question. During your presentation, you provided a list of countries which are trying to explore the fourth sector, but I didn't see any African country. Do you have any data on Africa? Thank you.
So it's one of my obsessions, because I don't think anybody's working on this in Africa yet, which is why I want to talk to you guys about this, right? I mean, and I'm not saying there could be stuff. There's so many social entrepreneurs. There are so many sustainable entrepreneurs. I mean, look at Hello Tractor. Look at so many of the good things that are going on, right? It's happening. But I don't think that anybody, I'm sure that there are cases. And please, you guys, if you learn of them, send me a message or whatever and let me know. But I mean, again, I look at Africa, which is a region that I love and that I spent, several years in, and I'm frustrated because I see the potential partly, and for so many things. I hate saying leapfrogging, but it's true, right? Because you have less infrastructure in some ways, you can do it right from the get-go. Right? I mean, whether it's systems, so they're not teaching kids the stuff you needed to know 50 years ago, or I don't even know if you needed to know that 50 years ago, but, fixing stuff like that, or building infrastructure in a more sustainable way from the beginning, or building the right kinds of companies, massive, massive opportunity. And I would love it if we could get like the AU, but then some of the governments, really caring about this, because I don't see it yet. And I think it could really resonate. And I think more people need to be talking about this. This is why I'm talking to you guys about it, because then you guys can go talk to people about it, and then maybe they go and talk to people about it. And then, over time, more people are talking about this. And I just have to say, like, in terms of that kind of infectious discussion, that kind of goes everywhere. I worked at the World Economic Forum for a long time before I was at the African Development Bank. And Klaus Schwab, who you might know is the head of the World Economic Forum, he became very interested in the concept of the fourth industrial revolution, right? That a lot of people talk about now, but it was not a thing yet, right? I mean, you had different kind of phrases about there's this big technological revolution, but he was really determined that people would start thinking about that in a very specific way, which was about how all of the different technologies were coming together in a way that were so disruptive, and we had to be aware of it. And so he wrote a book. He made sure that in Davos that year, like every discussion was basically focusing on this. And he just kept going and going. So that, now it's, I don't, maybe not all of you have heard of it, but I think most of you have heard of the fourth industrial revolution. I was there at the time. I was like, what is this new thing that but so it's amazing when you put a name on something, how if you then get enough people of influence and who care talking about it, that you can really create kind of at least a thought revolution. And then hopefully after that, new ways of doing things and more sustainable ways of doing things, which was the idea with the fourth industrial revolution as well as the fourth sector. Just by chance that they're both called fourth, by the way. But anyway.
If you can add, if you allowed me to add something, Jennifer, we have to use the word determination, right? So what we're starting to do now is something new. And Jennifer is bringing to young researchers from Africa, from other regions, but specifically from Africa and Latin America, a new idea that can be a very important tool for development. I don't know too much about the fourth sector, as you don't know as well. Jennifer, she is the one who knows very much because she is bringing us some new possibilities. But I think although we don't have nothing in Africa yet, maybe the moments that we are creating now will be important for us to disseminate the idea, and maybe, and I'm putting the Brazil Africa Institute as well in this conversation, Jennifer, to start to be one of the catalyzers of this conversation within Africa and also Latin America. And maybe I'm just thinking loudly now with my team, we can bring this discussion to be one of the topic of the Brazil Africa Forum this year, which will be related to natural resources, right? So just for you to understand, Nita, that we are on the same page. We sometimes looks like everything is a disaster, but maybe we can see the glass half full. I'm sorry to say, to use this cliche, but that's the beauty of bringing people who wants to do something different. So,
and I love that idea, Joao. And I just wanted to say, something else that's very important. And I talked about this, I think, when we had the last Brazil Africa Forum, which is that I think also those of you from Africa, I mean, and you know this, but people are always talking about South-South and they're thinking about Brazil, for example, to Africa, but there are so many interesting innovations happening in Africa, right? I mean, whether it's, we all know that, mobile banking and all this stuff. I mean, okay, that's cliche because it's from a long time ago, but also like solar energy, different kinds of technologies that they're using on farms in terms of drip irrigation. So many interesting things that can then, not only serve South-South, but also South-North. And so I think, I'm as much as I'm saying, I don't know. I mean, I don't think any government, at least that I've seen, has taken this on as like a thing. There is so much happening. And I know that governments would like more of this. So then, so let's try to, and then there's all those amazing entrepreneurs, with amazing ideas. So then how do we kind of bring it all together?
Good. Now let me pass the floor to Francisco.
So Professor Jennifer, thank you for your wonderful presentation. My question is, like considering that this philanthropic mindset of entrepreneurs in Brazil and I think in many other developing countries is weak than the an idea that I have that I don't know if it's right or not, but maybe the governments in developing countries have the necessity to act more strongly to promote the fourth sector. So I want to know if you could talk a little bit more about the policy toolkit at the disposal of governments to promote the private sector to go into this fourth sector direction. Thank you very much.
Right. So thanks a lot, Francisco. And I think, this is really the issue, which is just that, well, I think there's a few things. You have less philanthropy in places that have less resource, right? I mean, just in general. So it's not surprising that a lower or middle income country would have less. I would like to say, as someone who is American as well as Swiss, but American, grew up and in America, there's also a lot of philanthropy in places like the US because there isn't such a social safety net as you might expect. Right? I mean, so we have to also recognize some of the comparative issues. I mean, there are also shortcomings that have led to the state of affairs in the US as well. So I think, for sure the government has, at the end of the day, the government is tasked with responsibility to citizens, to take care of many of the things that we need to do collectively. I mean, the government is the citizens doing things collectively. I mean, sometimes they forget that, but that's what they are. So if this is something that, we want more of, clearly governments are the manifestation of ourselves at that level, really, that need to then create the structures that are needed. So if you look at the policy toolkit, and I won't get into too many of the details, I mean, it goes into like, what kind of taxation policy do you need? Right? What kind of company structures? Because it's going to need to be adapted. What would work in one place won't work in another. What kind of, what kind of regulatory environment? What kind of regulations? So what kind of reporting requirements do they have? I mean, do they have to do a report every year? Right? And how do you know that they're even really doing what they're doing? Because and should they get a tax write-off or not? I mean, what are some of the trade-offs? Right? You might not want to do that. And maybe they don't want to either, but in any event, it's really kind of going through all these different topics. Financial markets. How do you think about a financial market that is providing, finance for benefit type of organizations? So you really kind of, I mean, it's quite beautiful. I've seen the latest drafts. It's not totally done yet, but it almost is. But it literally goes like one by one through the different things that any company would need. And then kind of shows what you would need for this kind of very special kind of for benefit company and how governments can think about it. And I think, once that's out in the public domain, and there already are parts, bits and parts, that'll be great. We're also doing one specifically for financial markets so that they think about this. And there's also work that's been done for companies. But again, I find that, I mean, it's important, but in a way almost less interesting because that's what the focus always is. It's always like, how do the companies fix themselves? it's not always about the companies fixing themselves. You know, it's like, what's the environment that will allow them to thrive? You know, so I think you guys will be interested. Take a look at all of that. And I do have to say, as researchers, and I mean, some of you guys, like, you've already picked your PhD topics. I know some of you are doing a master's degree, but you know, this is an area that I think is, you know, quite ripe for more research, because there's not a huge amount done yet. Looking at it from the policy perspective, you know, I'm sure a lot has been done on social enterprise and corporate social responsibility and all that kind of stuff, but it's kind of different coming at it through a policy lens and a systemic lens, which is, I think, why I'm interested in it. It's very systemic. You know, what's wrong with this? The system, we all recognize there's something wrong, guys. We're like destroying this planet, and there's lots of people left behind. So then how do you fix it? Okay, step back. And it's not the only solution, but it's certainly, I think, one of the major solutions.
All right, Jennifer is a trendsetter, so maybe what she's doing now is something very new, which is new. So Marina, it's up to you now.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you for your presentation. That's very interesting. I actually work in a for-profit company that is funded by philanthropy and implements social projects in Latin America. So that's very interesting to hear. And I was thinking from the point of view of large multinational companies that are already established and then are migrating to the fourth sector and starting to aim at having more social impact. What do you think is the right way to make sure the solutions they generate for social impact are sensitive to the context and do not apply one-size-fits-all approaches that can be harmful to communities?
So, I mean, this is the challenge of having something that exists that you want to transform. So I'll just say that to start with, right? And what I like about fourth sector is that it's like, okay, well, let's let this new stuff grow. And then maybe that stuff will grow into it. I mean, I don't have, you know, a silver bullet for you on this one. But I can say again, like, remember, we're all individuals. Remember that slide I showed, right? Companies are made up of individuals. The shareholders are individuals. The government's made up by individuals. So I think as they move, and mistakes will get made, but, you know, certainly what you don't want is window dressing. Right? I mean, I guess it's okay if there's some window dressing, but you want them to really be, you know, if they're trying to get credit for making real changes. And unfortunately, a lot of these big companies, they say they're doing things and they're not, right? I mean, they kind of make it look, and, you know, not to say that there aren't some that really are. So then how, I mean, I think, you know, they have their shareholders, first of all, I think need to hold them to account. Their customers, and that's you and me, need to hold them to account. And even their shareholders are us as well, because often it's our pension funds, you know, for example, and governments need to hold them to account. But at the same time, you know, I made this disparaging comment about a widget factory, right? I mean, none of us want to work in a, but we need widgets. You know, we also need the widgets. So the point is, a lot of these companies are doing things that we need. And what I think is, if you have something like the fourth sector growing, it's going to create competition, right? So then people who want something more sustainable, right? They care about how they're spending their money. Or the governments are looking, also government spends a lot of money, right, on procurement. So they're deciding who are they going to procure from. And so I think the big companies, if they don't change, and a lot of them do realize this, then they're going to have a run for their money, because they're going to have competition from these upstarts who are already fit for purpose for the sorts of things that we want in the future. So again, it's not a silver bullet, but I think there's no like God that's going to come down from on high and going to fix everything, right? I mean, we all, I think, have to do our part with any influence that we have, you know, whether it's what we buy, you know, the kinds of jobs we do, you guys as researchers, you know, what kinds of things you focus on, you know, and afterwards, even for me, like, you know, I'm doing a portfolio of things. I also sit on the board of a ARC Limited, which is the financial affiliate of African Risk Capacity. So, I mean, that's all about providing, say, environmental or insurance solutions for natural disasters, right? But, you know, so what I'm trying to do, and then I'm doing that, and then I'm, you know, working with Joao on the Institute. So I spend my time trying to think, okay, how do I bring all these things that I care about together? You know, and so I have lately been trying to talk more about things like fourth sector. because I think we all have a lot more influence than you would think, you know, and I think we want a different world. I think that's why you guys are all fellows, right? So, and interested, because there's so much to learn. I mean, South-South is fascinating, but there's South everything, South-North, you know. Anyway, I hope that answers. I mean, it's kind of a verbose way of saying, let's do this 4th sector stuff too, but then all of us, you know, don't think someone else is going to do it. You know, it's like, it's all of our responsibility.
Yeah, I don't think you have to satanize, Marina, the private sector, multinational companies, or even the government. Sometimes we just point the finger and say, you are wrong, you have to do something. But I understand this is our responsibility as well. It's we individuals, we organizations, we companies, we can do many things. If we do our part of the job, the whole job will be different, right? The whole picture. We have here a screen with different faces, your face, my face, Jennifer's face, Francisco's face, etc. So we have our role individually, and I think what we have now, the conversation, is a very big ecosystem, as Jennifer mentioned, that is starting to be discussed. It's something new, but for some people it's not new. And Jennifer is involved in many spaces, in many activities. And what she's bringing now is something that we can create in an environmental ecosystem. We can do things differently. And I know that Jennifer had this conversation with many head of states when she had the position as Vice President of the African Development Bank. And I know many of them knock at her door asking for something. And Jennifer May thought that what you are doing already, what kind of exercise you are doing to help your country. So why you are coming to my bank to ask for money if you are not doing your homework? So, and this comes to us as well as an NGO. Sometimes when I speak with the private sector, Jennifer, I ask them, what kind of a responsibility, social responsibility you are bringing to your company? Because at the end of the day, I mean, you want to make money, yes, but what about the people that work for you? What about the people who are around your company? So this is a very big ecosystem, and the answer cannot be emphasized in 1 hour conversation. This is a kickoff, I understand, of this conversation. Jennifer, how many more minutes do you have?
Maybe about five more minutes. Would that be good?
5 more minutes. All right. So I think we are about to close, and I'm very pleased that Jennifer brought this very important message for us. And I understand the fellows after this conversation, Jennifer, will have a broad perspective about the role of the private sector, but also individually what we can do. And I had some comments that I put here in my piece of paper. You mentioned sustainability and inclusivity, right? It's important to have sustainability, and the SDGs, as you mentioned. Maybe tomorrow we may have another list of SDGs to achieve. But inclusivity is something that we should not forget. Right? So if we not have a list of people who are out of the list included in the list, we are not doing our part of the job. And to conclude, you mentioned social responsibility. I'm just repeating this. Without social responsibility, the 3 sectors, private sector, government, and NGOs, civil society, won't be able to achieve what they should achieve. So once again, Jennifer, thank you very much. You gave us a very impressive recommendation for our activities for the fellows. And I know that after your information, we should digest very properly and try to bring more decisions to our environment. So thanks again, Jennifer. You have 2 minutes to conclude, as you have only 5 minutes.
Look, I mean, to conclude, I thank you so much for the opportunity. This was really fun. I love nothing more than talking to young people because you inspire me. You know, you're the hope of the future, honestly, guys. I mean, if the world, you know, my son who's 17 was doing a presentation with one of his classmates on how past generations have handled the environment and passed it down, and they were drawing devils and stuff like that, you know. And I think it's true. My generation has been awful, and several of the, I'm Generation X apparently, but Y, you know, millennials, whatever. So I think really, you know, not saying that all, you know, all of the responsibilities are on your hands, but like you guys have so much energy, and there is an incredibly impressive sort of, you know, I don't know, force of nature of the younger generation and everybody I'm meeting. And I could see it also from the questions that you asked and the way that you're thinking about things. So you do give me hope for the future. You do give me hope. And it's why I'm talking to you guys about the fourth sector, because if any of you were deciding what to do, you know, I mean, academia is fine and all these different things, as Joao will tell you, but if maybe you're kind of deciding, and now this sounds pretty cool, whether it's on the helping to, you know, kind of move things along or creating your own really interesting, you know, for benefit enterprise, you know, these are the building blocks of a better future. So thank you guys so much for having me. Joao, thank you so much for inviting me. This was really fun. And I look forward to following what you guys do afterwards. And I'll make sure, by the way, I'll share the PowerPoint. Keep in mind, it's a bit complex and sometimes things are layered. So when you go through it, you'd want to look at it in slideshow, just if you want to see it coming up. Some of the slides are simple, but it's got a lot of slides and one comes on the other. So just to let you know, there's some animations and stuff in there.
All right, very good. So just for you to know that Jennifer, she sits in our board. So everything that we do at the Brazil Africa Institute, part of what we do has some Jennifer fingerprints, okay? Okay, thanks Jennifer, thanks all of you. And I hope next time we have another fantastic lecture as we had today. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Have a great and safe, healthy week.